Welcome back to the Warrior Servant Leader podcast. Today we have a fascinating guest, Andrew Drasen. He's the author of A Vision of Hope and the creator of a 90-day framework that helps people transform pain into growth and live on purpose, not by accident. His work began with his own journey through adversity, loss, and rediscovery, experiences that forced him to rebuild from the ground up and ultimately inspired him to create a structured program others could follow. Now, the seed of vision wasn't planted in what you may think. It actually was planted in the least likely of places, a jail dayroom, under fluorescent lights surrounded by men serving time. Andrew began writing while incarcerated, using journal entries and essays as a way to process his addiction, his mistakes, and the questions of identity and purpose that haunted him. He finished the final chapter of the memoir minutes before walking out of the prison doors on his release date. And this timing was symbolic. His story wasn't just about survival, but about carrying forward a blueprint for a change into the outside world. Andrew learned that growth comes when people rediscover their identity and clarity and clarify their direction. Purpose follows when they create actionable, measurable steps to live life differently. This progression is universal. It applies not only to those in recovery or reentry like Andrew, but also to leaders facing burnout, professionals at crossroads, or anyone who simply wants to live with greater clarity and intention. Andrew, dude, welcome to the Warrior Servant Leader podcast. We're so glad to have you here. We're going to have a fascinating conversation.
Yeah, sounds good, Pat. Yeah, I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
All right, let's get to the question everybody's dying to hear the answer for, and to give us some perspective and background. Prison. What was that? What's the Paul Harvey? What's the rest of the story?
I'm not sure what you mean by that.
What were you in prison for?
Oh, drugs.
Okay.
I mean, I'm not sure who Paul Harvey was. So
Okay.
It went right over my head. But yeah, I mean, it is drugs. I mean, I was in and out of jail and prison throughout my late teens and 20s due to addiction, and I mean, it was a struggle for a long time. So, yeah, the last incarceration was the incarceration when I wrote the memoir, and I ended up getting off of supervision the next year, and I'm actually going through the expungement process right now. So yeah. And I remember when I was speaking with Legal Action of Wisconsin, which is the attorneys that are helping me with the expungement, after talking to them, they said that usually someone with a record as extensive as mine, they wouldn't even recommend filing. But after kind of hearing my story and Googling me a little bit, they saw that I have an exceptional transformation story, and they'd be happy to work with me. So that's a process, but yeah, going through it now.
That's awesome. And I apologize, Paul, for listeners that aren't as old as me, and obviously, Andrew, you're substantially younger than me. Paul Harvey was a guy who had his own radio show back in the day, and it was called The Rest of the Story. And he would tell you about a particular event or person or something and then he would tell you the rest of the story, what was behind the story kind of deal. So my apologies for dropping Paul Harvey on you. And now our listeners around the world know who Paul Harvey was.
Paul Harvey is now.
Yeah, Google him. One of his most famous is a police officer. It's just called a police officer, and he describes in great eloquence what it means or what it is to be a police officer. And it's one of its. They play it every year on Police Memorial Day. But anyway, he has some great stories behind the stories, and was a syndicated radio guy. So last century. All right, so I want to get into things with you. about your thoughts and perspectives on how community is so important in recovery, how faith has played a part in your transformation, and then getting into what's this 90-day program that you created, and how can somebody that's not in recovery or reentry, but like you said, that's facing burnout, or they're just at a crossroad in their life where they're struggling and they don't know what or how to keep moving forward. So let's start with that, the whole concept of that you've learned and talk about in your writings and stuff is the importance of community.
Yeah. So there are a few quotes that I kind of like. One is like, "You lay with dogs long enough, you're bound to get fleas." And then another one, which an old counselor during one of my treatment programs used to say is, "A monkey can't sell bananas." No. That was what she said also, but it was if you go to a barbershop long enough, eventually you're going to end up with a haircut. So we kind of. I also heard somewhere that like we're the sum of like the 5 people that we spend the most time with. So it's like, who are our associations? And especially after kind of like a bigger event, like something like quitting drugs or alcohol, or being released from incarceration, or a returning veteran, or someone who was just laid off after 20 years. It's like, okay, what do you do with yourself now, and who are you going to surround yourself with? And are you going to surround yourself with people who Will Smith did this one thing where he talked about people who fan your flames, and I really liked that also. And are you going to surround yourself with people who fan your flames, or people who snuff them out? So it's just kind of becoming cognizant of the relationships that we have, and then also I feel like giving back also, like when we live like not only for our own benefit, and things just tend to go better. And I feel like that's a big part of community is we all need help at times. And, that's what community is there for, is to help each other out.
Yeah. The classic old quote is, "It takes a village to raise a child." That was the one back in the 70s and 60s when I was growing up. Looking back, what was missing in your life that would have made a difference in what path you took?
Oh, I mean, it was all internal. That's really what was missing. It was a sense of self-acceptance and feeling like I was worthy enough and that I could lead a productive life. I mean, okay, so like when I was a child, like I was overweight and I dealt with some bullying, and like I had a very negative self-image, and I tried to compensate for that by getting perfect grades and just being very amiable, and let friends copy off my homework, and just I couldn't tell anyone no, and just I didn't want to give anyone a reason not to like me, because I thought that my weight was reason enough. And so then summer going into 7th grade, I grew 6 inches, and I was no longer that little fat kid, but I still kind of felt that way on the inside. And, I still didn't feel comfortable with myself. So, that I'd say that was kind of the biggest thing was learning to feel comfortable and okay in my own skin, and not really caring so much about what other people think. I mean, it's one thing, you don't want to have everyone hate you, because that obviously says something about you. But, like to get so caught up on what this person or that person thinks about you, I mean, it's a fool's errand, because for one, you'll never actually know. And for two, what you think about yourself matters more than anything else.
Wow. So kind of going back, because this was a parenting lesson, because we had 5 kids, and this was kind of a parenting lesson we learned, and we've been married like 46 years. So when I say a parenting lesson, we're talking back in the 80s and 90s when our kids were born. That concept of look at your child's 5 closest friends, and if they're hooligans, your kid's going to be a hooligan kind of deal. Was that your experience, that your 5 closest friends were not really your friends kind of deal? I mean, were they a bad influence? Where did you, because now that you look back and you're going community and looking forward, you're going, community is so essential. What was your community back in 7th, 8th grade, high school?
Yeah, so my community in like 7th, 8th grade, I'd say it was all right, and that's kind of where I started experimenting with weed and alcohol and things of that nature. But it was really kind of when I made that shift from middle school to high school. I went from a school from 500 students of middle and high school combined for middle school to 3,000 students just in a high school. So it was much bigger, a bigger culture shock. Those insecurities kind of came rushing back, and I played football my freshman year, so I kind of fell in with, the athletic kids because they hung out with the popular girls and, the pretty girls, and, they like to drink and smoke, and, so that's what we did. And I mean, throughout my like freshman and sophomore years, I mean, I'd have parties at my parents' house like every weekend for like 6 months out of the year, because they hosted, or they had a permanent campsite about an hour and a half away that we'd go to like 6 months out of the year growing up. And as a kid, like, I loved it. It was some of my best memories. But as I hit those high school years and, friends and girls became more important to me, that I stopped going, and I started hosting parties at my parents' house. And, I feel like they had an idea, but they did not know to the extent, not nearly. But my dad always seemed to find something, whether it was like a beer cap under a candle, or, like one time vomit in like the bathroom closet. I mean, there's always something askew. And I think he had an idea, but they didn't understand, the extent of it. So, I mean, a lot of it was by choice, but yeah, I mean, like the people that I hung around, they liked to party around in those times. And even like when it graduated into the harder drugs, I mean, that's who I'd surround myself with, is people who did harder drugs, because, I didn't have to hide it from them. And whereas, like, I didn't want to be around people who weren't shooting heroin when I was shooting heroin, I mean, that's a very taboo thing. And, it's just, it's a hard thing to hide. So, yeah, I mean, I definitely think there's some credence to that, we kind of adopt the behaviors of those that we hang around.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. So you end up in prison your last stint, and you're working on these journal entries and essays and vision of hope. What planted that seed to take that path while you're in prison?
It was a few things. I mean, I'd done plenty of time up until that point. I'd already been sentenced to prison twice, and I knew I had like 6 to 8 months to do. And I'd had some seeds planted in the past. I went through 8 different treatments before finding any kind of meaningful recovery. And at the beginning of each treatment, I'd have to do an assessment where they basically asked me everything about my life, my family history, work history, my drug using history. I mean, just my entire history. And so I had a couple of counselors that told me that I should write a book, and one actually offered to help me do it. And I didn't take her up on it at that point. I mean, I was still sick at the time. But then kind of another seed that was planted was my mom and I had talked about co-writing a book where one side would be like her cover and her perspective, flip it over, it would be my cover and my perspective of the same events. And that didn't happen. But like I said, I knew I had like 6 to 8 months to do. So I just decided to do it. And I didn't know what I was doing it for, really, other than I wanted to do something different than I'd done previously. And because, like I said, I'd done plenty of time up until then, and I wouldn't make the best use of it. I'd exercise, which is good, but I'd spend a lot of time playing cards and gambling for low stakes, and watching brainless television and reading fiction novels, and just trying to pass the time instead of actually make use of the time. So that was kind of the difference that I wanted that last time, is I wanted to make use of it instead of get through it.
So let's go down that path a little bit. That the linear what's the word I want to use? Progression is everything begins with a thought, and your thoughts become your attitudes, which are settled way of thinking, and your attitudes are displayed in behaviors. Repeated behaviors become your habits, and then habits become what you expect from yourself and others. How did you get out of that habit, having spent a stint in prison before your last one, that you have a release date? So was it easy? It was. I don't know if I should ask this as a question or just make it a statement. Is it easier to bide your time because you knew, hey, on this date I'm out, so I'm just going to lay back and deal with it? How did you go from playing cards and just kicking back to intentionally changing what and how you thought?
Well, I think the shift had started before then, but because during that incarceration, it resulted from an overdose, and I tried getting clean, and I was like 6 days clean, and I relapsed and overdosed in my car and ended up in jail, and that's how I ended up in that situation where I wrote the book. And but prior to that, honestly, like I had an experience with psychedelics, and it kind of changed my perspective on a lot of things. And I feel like it kind of set me in a better place mentally, but physically I was still sick. So, I feel like that was really kind of one of the turning points, honestly, was, and that's actually one of the last chapters in the books is talking about that experience. And then it kind of loops into the prologue where I overdose and lead me to that event. But yeah, I mean, it just started with wanting, okay. So like during that experience, I got to thinking about money quite a bit, and how money is often a tool that can help us open doors and accomplish what we actually set out to accomplish with our lives. But so often it becomes kind of the pursuit itself, whether that's based off of survival or, comfort or whatever the reason is, instead of trying to get money to do the thing that we want to do, now we're just pursuing more money, and how that's kind of a trap. And I feel like, when they talk about money is the root of all evil, that's kind of what it means, is when it misdirects us on our path for our lives. And so, it was just a very introspective experience. And so, like I said, I feel like that kind of put me in a better state mentally, but physically I was still sick. And so I knew that with the overdose, regardless of what happened, I was going to have the time to get my body right. And I just wanted to make better use of my time. And then writing the book itself was a healing experience. I mean, I shed the first tears for my my mom's dad who passed while I was in prison the first time, my first tears for my dad's mom who passed. And it just kind of let me look at everything from an outside perspective instead of being so attached to it. And like I said, when I wrote it, I didn't even know what I was writing it for, other than I wanted to tell my truth as honestly as I could. And then the vision just kind of grew from there.
Okay. Got to ask, the psychedelics, was that in a controlled therapy, or was that recreational and you just happened to have a good trip?
It was recreational. I mean, I dabbled with psychedelics since like my teenage years, and some of
Mm,
my most formative experiences that I learned lessons that still stick with me today have come under the influence of psychedelics. I mean, it's how I first like I 100% believe there is a God. Like no one can tell me anything else because I felt it, and um like that was one thing it did. Another thing that it did is it taught me how we are all interconnected. We are not all separate, and that's kind of an illusion, and we put these boxes up to kind of maintain that separation, but that's where it kind of comes back to community. I mean, we are interconnected beings. So that was kind of another lesson that I learned on psychedelics. So, I mean, I'm a proponent of psychedelic assisted therapy. But with that, I mean, there are risks. There are risks with
mm,
anything. If you have underlying mental health conditions, it can amplify them. It can bring out underlying, schizophrenia or, I don't know outside of that. But, it can cause one to become unstable. So the thing that I'd say is know the risks before delving into anything like that. But for me
yeah,
personally, I mean, it's been a formative experience.
yeah, and I know of people uh, through controlled therapy sessions and psychedelics. It did a lot for them processing their bad self-image and depression and anxiety and other things that was again in a controlled therapy session that was the opening the right doors at the right time and for the right reasons that helped them in their recovery from, like I said, depression and anxiety and other things. Let's talk about interesting that you experience God in a psychedelic state of mind. How has that experience continued in the absence of a psychedelic state of mind?
So, I mean, it's really kind of grounded me in my own purpose, really. I mean, it's if I didn't have faith, I wouldn't be taking the actions that I'm taking today. That much I can say. I try not to I try not to look at every interaction as like, what can you do for me? But like, how can I help you also, and just really try and be present and just be a positive person and do all that I can to benefit others. I mean, that's why I built a Vision of Hope Media. It's why I built Leverage Corporation, which is another business that I started last year. And I mean, it's what drives me. I mean, it's what gives me my purpose is just kind of knowing that this isn't all for nothing.
Okay, awesome, awesome. We're going to I'm going to get into that. I want to get into your book. I want to get into your 90-day program that you created. Before we do that, because the whole warrior servant leader mindset is that, and particularly when we drop the shows on Tuesday, Taco Tuesday, take action, crush obstacles. That's a mindset, a perspective that you have to have, as opposed to, I call it the lazy river ride, where one of my most despised sayings is, "It is what it is." I hate that saying because I think it's such a defeatist that you surrender control, you surrender influence and impact by adopting that negative mindset. So, how do you? Because you have the added pressures and stressors of addiction that a lot of people don't have, but they still struggle making decisions, moving forward, having a vision of hope kind of mindset. So when you're facing, what are some of the biggest obstacles you have faced say in the last 6 months or a year that required you to buckle down and do something, and what's that look like for you? If you were going to tell our listeners, hey, here's some steps that I took. Here's an obstacle I face, and I don't know if I told you when we did the phone pre-interview, this is very organic and conversations go where they go. Now, I think I'm remembering this correctly. Your girlfriend overdosed and died.
She didn't overdose. She's my fiance. She committed suicide last July. So I mean, that was definitely the biggest.
Okay.
That was the biggest obstacle that I've ever been through in my life. I mean, and then being in recovery and not, turning back to that. And I mean, that's kind of one of the things I took out of it. If that didn't lead me back to my destructive behaviors, I mean, we were together for 5.5 years and lived together, and she was a person I loved more than anyone in this world. And, and that was a huge struggle. I mean, and that's kind of where the curriculum and the workbook came from, is because I kind of had to look at my own identity and figure out who I was without her now, and what was my life going to look like, and how was I going to move forward. And, in the immediate aftermath, I mean, I stayed on the phone, I had a lot of support from friends and family, which helped a lot. And, I saw a therapist and a grief counselor, and, I tried to stay connected, because one saying that I think is pretty applicable is an addict alone is in bad company, because our thinking tends to be our own worst enemy. And when you're spiraling or in grief or, heavy emotion, that can be a very dangerous period. So it was just kind of getting through that, and then realizing that, if I were to self-destruct, that wouldn't do her any justice, that wouldn't honor her in any way. And, ultimately it made me want to just help share our stories. So, her death can maybe mean something to someone else, if maybe someone's seeing this, they're on the edge and, don't think about the impact that it will have on their loved ones. And I mean, she had a 12-year-old daughter that she left behind. And I mean, it's, the life is worth living. And, one thing that I didn't learn until afterwards is people who tend to commit suicide by jumping, they almost always regret it, like immediately afterwards, and realize that, their problems have solutions, and, that they want to live. And, I don't know if that gives me comfort or not, but there are a lot of jumpers who have survived and have said the same exact thing. So, that's what I'd kind of say to anyone who's maybe kind of been on that road, is like, man, first you have to have hope that your life can get better. I feel like hope is like the prerequisite to change, because if you don't have any hope that your situation can improve, you're not going to put forth any effort to improve it. And, with enough hope becomes belief. And with that belief comes conviction and consistency and building a different life for yourself. But it all starts with that flicker of hope.
Wow. And if I heard you correctly, that experience, and I hope I didn't cross the line bringing it up, that experience was kind of the launching for your 90-day program that you created, or did?
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I'd already written the memoir and the Reflections companion book, but that's what inspired the workbook and the structured curriculum behind the books. Definitely.
Let's go there. Well, let's go there. What is that 90-day? What's that look like? And eventually, I want you to share, some links and whatnot for people can go and take a look at things. But take us through that. You had a term for it, the structured 90-day process. What's that look like?
Yeah. So, I mean, like if an individual wanted to do it on their own, they could just get the 3 books and kind of go through it, and they read a chapter of the memoir, do the corresponding workbook pages, and just kind of alternate, each day, you go through a memoir page and a journal entry, or a memoir chapter and a journal entry chapter, do the corresponding workbook pages, then you work through reflections the same way. Then it ends with a capstone speech where you just kind of put a bunch of different aspects together. And then there's also like the structured version of it, which is built for like treatment centers and reentry programs, veterans organizations, faith-based organizations, things of that nature. So currently, like that's kind of a longer process in rolling it out. I currently have a multi-state organization with facilities in Pennsylvania and Delaware that's writing it into their request for grant funding, essentially. So it's making some headway, but like I said, that's a longer process when you're dealing with grant funding and nonprofits, things of that nature. But yeah, I mean, if an individual just kind of wanted to grow, and like the workbook itself, like it doesn't talk about drugs or alcohol or criminality once. It's self-identifying. The person doing it identifies what they want to change, what they want to change it to, and then the workbook kind of helps create that map to build that change. And kind of how I position it is, you have behavior-based models like cognitive behavioral therapy, which are very good. They teach people skills to say no and how to stop a behavior. But for me, what it didn't do is teach me who I was becoming after I changed that behavior. And that's the gap that I try to address by teaching people who they're becoming and why maintaining that change is worthwhile, and helping to build that consistency. Because personally, for me, like that's kind of where it would typically fall off, is like once the external safeguards were either removed or lessened, think either release from incarceration, or maybe I finished an inpatient program, or finished drug court, things of that nature. Like whenever the people watching over me weren't watching over as hard, that's when I tend to slip, until I started making the decisions, because it's the life that I want to build for myself. And these are the actions that I have to take that support that life. So that's really I feel the difference.
Yeah, and that's awesome, because I think it takes us right back that you are a living example of that progression. From everything begins up here with what and how you think. And if you don't change how you think, all the external impositions of rules and regulations are not going to have a positive impact on you to get you to be the person that you want to be. And I've said this before, is in other episodes, there's a 15-year-old, he's now a saint in the Catholic Church. Just last year became a saint. Born in 1991, died in 2006 of leukemia. And he had this insight as a 15-year-old, and this is one of his more popular quotes, I guess, is, "We're all born unique, but sadly many of us die a photocopy of someone or something else." And in his mind, it was, what he was thinking always was, who did God create me to be? What are my gifts? What are my talents? As opposed to me, my ego going, and you know who Michael Jordan is, though, right?
Yeah.
Okay. You didn't know Paul Harvey, but you know Michael Jordan. But when I was, as a young adult and whatnot, it was this, be like Mike. That was a big saying. And buy those Jordan Nike shoes because you can be like Mike. And what a lie that is to us, to, be manipulated to want to be like someone else, when in reality, God created you in such a unique way that there is nobody before you or after you that is gifted exactly like you are. And so I think that what I'm hearing you say is you had that, that's your transformation, is you learned that principle, that truth. It all starts here. And you want, what you want for yourself to be a better person is the focus, as opposed to, hey, if nobody's going to be watching me, I can do what I want. Or it's okay, I know I'm going to fall. And you're tired of that life. So that's what I hear you saying.
So here's a couple of like big insights that I came to realize. And one is that everything that ever is, was, or will be all begins with a thought. So that tells me the power of our thoughts. I mean, it literally can determine the reality. I mean, you think about any invention or any system that was put in place, anything that existed, it all started as a thought before it was created. Then when I came to the insight, essentially like with AI, like I can build literally anything that I put my mind to. Like that was another kind of a big one for me. And then one of my favorite quotes in the book is a decision without thought is nothing, or a decision without action is nothing more than a thought. So, you know, like it's what we put our awareness and our effort and our energy into. That's what we will see results in.
Yeah, that scripture, faith without works is meaningless. Yeah, that, you know, I can believe in God and everything, but if I don't live my life, live that belief, then my faith is useless.
Yes.
So,
I mean, I think that's a very important point that you just touched on, is like the embodiment aspect. You know, like it's not enough to just go to church and say you believe. And, you know, if it's not reflected in your interactions and your actions and, you know, what you do with yourself each day and, you know, your thoughts and how you interact with your family and just all of it, then you're not living for God. You know, like you're saying you are, but you're not.
yeah, get this book. I'm only like 6 pages into it. I just started reading it yesterday, and I'm doing it with a pen, and it's real short. It's called the presence of God. It's conversations. This guy, his name is Brother Lawrence. His real name is Nicholas something. This is from 1666, and this book is still so impactful in today's world. And it's 4 conversations between the author of the book, and then 14 letters by this Brother Lawrence. And it's exactly it's the things you're talking about, that at 18 years old in 1666, his revelation was, it was wintertime, and he's European, and it was a barren tree, and this revelation in the presence of God that he could see was that barren tree in a few months is going to have it's going to have buds and flowers and produce fruit. And how that gave him such great insight into the presence, mindset, and greatness of God that created this world and created him. And that was his freeing concept, that from that he kept growing in his love for God. And then that, like you said, if it's done without, you can have all the faith. It's not about going to church and that kind of stuff. You have to live what you believe. But get that book. It's real short. Just Google Brother Lawrence, and Lawrence, and it's what an insight. I've taken so many pages of notes, and I'm only 6 pages into it. And I think our audience, it would be an incredible resource for anybody, regardless of what your faith is to read this book and this guy's insights and these conversations. But I digress. I'm not. That's like a squirrel. I just took off after a squirrel running across the backyard. How can people reach out to you? How can they learn more about you? Because you're talking Pennsylvania, Delaware. This isn't just a little local thing you got going. You're trying to impact a large part of the population here in the U.S. So how can people reach you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm on all social media, just Andrew Drasen, Drasen. You can go to a visionofhopebook.com. You can find a blog series, events, contact page, the books, links, all that. Books are available wherever books are sold, pretty much. I will be speaking at virtually at the Global Addiction, Behavioral Health, and Psychiatry Conference in October of this year. I'll be hosting a breakout room at the Mental Health and Substance Abuse Recovery Conference in Baraboo, Wisconsin, in October this year. So, yeah, I'll be around.
That's awesome. And I always ask guests this, that what if there's a question I didn't ask, there's something that you're dying to share, but I didn't take us down that path. Is there something you'd like to share that it's like, Pat, I can't get off the show until I say this?
Just be super aware of your self-talk. We talk to ourselves more than we talk to anyone else in our entire lives, and what we tell ourselves matters, and that's kind of how we talked about, the power of thoughts and how it can help shape our realities. So just be mindful of what your thoughts are, and don't put credence into the negative ones, okay, so before we hop off, so I got this tattoo, right? And this is an eyeball, and this is the world that's circling around the pupil. And to me, it represents the way that we see the world determines our reality. So if we see everything as just bad and terrible and just war and famine, that's the world that we're going to be living in. Or we can find the good in the world, and then that's the world that we live in. It's all what lens that we choose to see the world.
Yeah. That's man, and that's Brother Lawrence. That's exactly what he's talking about. His worldview is he sees the presence of God in everything, and I tell this to people, when I'm doing consulting or coaching, is that 80,000 thoughts a day is what the average human being has. 50,000 of them are negative. And so that's how your mind is spinning constantly. You're constantly thinking, and whatever you're looking for in life, you will always find more of it. And they go, oh yeah, that's a really cute, saying, yeah, how do I do it? And I tell them, well, we're going to make it real easy. When you come back next week, I want you to tell me, how many red Volkswagens did you see this past week? And it's so funny how they come back and go, I had no idea there were so many red Volkswagens in this town. And I go, that's my point. You were looking for red Volkswagens. So what are you looking for in your day-to-day life? What are you looking for 5 years from now or 10 years from now? And if it's that negative, or you're the boss at work, or in a leadership position, if you are looking for the worst in people, you will find it. But if you're looking for the best in the people that you work with, you'll find that too. So I love how your worldview, your positivity is intentional. It's not just going to happen kind of deal. And you are working every day to build that up in yourself and others. So man, that's so cool. Again, Vision of Hope on Amazon. Is that wherever?
Yeah, it's on Amazon,
okay.
Barnes & Noble, bookshop.org.
Okay. And we'll get that in the notes for our audience. Andrew, it's such a pleasure to have you here today. I'm glad our paths crossed and we got to have a very frank and open conversation, because that's how we make ourselves better, and that's how we grow in community. And to our listeners, we're now in 74 countries and Hong Kong, China. If this resonated with you, reach out to Andrew to learn more. Share this episode with somebody that you know needs to hear it, because as we close every episode, I tell you, always, always, always strive to do the right things at the right time, the right way, and for the right reasons, because that's what warrior servants and leaders do. And sharing our podcast with someone you know needs to hear this message, share it, because you're a warrior servant leader, and we're a community of like-minded people. So I love y'all, appreciate y'all. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next week.